need my glasses. Like, where are my glasses? They're dirty too. Okay, we're in this series on 1 Corinthians, and I'm not going through it verse by verse. I think that I will do a lot of verses. You know. I'm going to bounce around. I'm just trying to give you an idea, a sense of where Paul is coming from when he wrote this letter right now, because this is only the second message in this series that potentially could go for a while. So we're going to focus on one dimension of Pauline theology, on Paul's theology that will assist us, hopefully, as we go through this letter. Okay? Sounds very daunting, doesn't it? Okay. The average person, I don't know who's all average here, but the average person is bombarded by about 5,000 brand messages every day. You know, people trying to sell you stuff, whether they're driving down, Karcher Boulevard and just seeing all these stores. Everyone's trying to sell you something. And all these brand names are being thrown at you. About an average of 5,000. Now, are you familiar with this brand? What is that? Nike. Yeah, Nike. The goddess in the Greek pantheon of victory. So when you're wearing Nike, you are already victorious, okay? What is interesting, her name is Carolyn Davidson. She was being paid $2 an hour to work for Nike a number of years ago and came up with this logo and was paid $35 for it. That was it. That was it. For a multi-billion-dollar industry. She got $35 for that logo. Yeah. Yeah. How about this? Well, this one's kind of self-explanatory. Amazon, right? Yeah, which one's that? What's that one? Yeah. Jan, you got that one? Okay. What I love, though, is that they have this line from A to Z saying basically you can buy at Amazon anything from A to Z. And, of course, it gives you a little smile when you buy from Amazon. So, whatever. And then there's this one, FedEx, right? When it's got to get there fast, it's kind of a logo of theirs. But they have this arrow right there between the E and the X, which just shows you that it gets there fast and it's accurate, like an arrow is FedEx. Of course, then there's Baskin-Robbins. How many flavors does Baskin-Robbins have? 31, yeah, and there's the 31 right in their logo. Of course, which one's this? None of you know what this one is, right? It's Starbucks, yeah. Starbucks is actually a minor character in the Moby Dick novel. Did you know that? Yep. And it has that nautical theme, which makes sense, coming, out of the Seattle area. But this was actually a 16th century wood carving of a siren. Sirens would call the men on their ships to come towards them, towards the rocks, and the ships would crash on the rocks. But the men, would hear the siren call, and they couldn't resist it. Well, that's Starbucks for a lot of people. It's a siren call to a lot of you caffeinators out there. Okay? This one, Google. What I love, very simple. Primary colors, except for this. You can't really see it up there, but that's green. That's yellow. Except for the L. Basically saying we don't always go by the rules. Primary colors, and suddenly there's this one secondary color, the L. And I'm sure none of you know what this one is. Really? Awesome. I love McDonald's. Fast food, cheap, and it tastes good as far as I'm concerned. And if you've ever had a van with young kids, you can always get a meal by looking between the seats and getting French fries. There'll be plenty there, right? Parents, who've had minivans with those Happy Meals and French fries everywhere in the car. Smart people stay up late trying to figure out these logos, okay? That will be memorable, that will be compelling, that will create within you a desire to have what it is presenting to you. Arguably, there's really no argument, the greatest logo is the cross. Yeah. For 2,000 years, it's been associated with Jesus and the movement that he began. These two wooden beams fastened together to execute slaves and criminals is what it was intended to do. That is, I guess you could say, our corporate logo, okay? All right, we who follow Jesus. Now, other religions have inviting symbols. They do. There's the Star of David right here, right? For Judaism, the lotus flower for Buddhism, and here the crescent moon and the star for Islam. These are images of light and nature and beauty, okay? Religious symbols designed to attract people. No marketing expert in his right mind or her right mind would recommend a symbol of execution like a cross to be, quote unquote, the logo for that faith. So you would think. Now the cross is so familiar to us. You know, I mean, they're beautiful pieces of jewelry, right? Especially necklaces with the cross on. I'm wearing one right now. Art has depicted the cross in so many beautiful ways. It has desensitized us to a degree of the horror of what the cross meant 2,000 years ago. It's taken away the shock value, what we've done with the cross in many instances. I mean, imagine, Jeremy's not here today, but he works for Power Plus. He's an electrician. Imagine if Power Plus had a logo of like an electric chair, right? And underneath it, it said, "The power is on." I mean, really, that's kind of how the cross was being received back then. That's ridiculous. They would have thought 2,000 years ago. But you look at the cross today, more graves are marked by a cross than anything else. But the cross 2,000 years ago was seen as a form of capital punishment, of death. It'd be like telling someone 2,000 years ago to mark their grave with a knife, right? Or some hatchet that would be used to behead someone. When Paul scribed this letter to the Corinthians, his first letter to the Corinthians, the cross was not a necklace to be worn. Okay? It was a form of capital punishment. It brought forth the images of blood-stained wood, often with corpses rotting upon it. Okay? For Paul, the cross, though, was central to this message, to this letter that he was writing, to the new life that he was speaking of through Christ. Paul had his work cut out for him, presenting the cross as a major symbol. Now, we've just begun this series on First Letter to Corinth. And if you recall last week, I talked about how Corinth was kind of the Vegas of its day. It was the summer of love, San Francisco in 67. I mean, that was Corinth back in the first century. Rebuilt by Julius Caesar, by the best city planners. It had the latest and the greatest there at Corinth. It was located at a major trade crossroads between Asia and Europe, and money was just flowing through Corinth in that first century. Culturally, ethnically, religiously, extremely diverse, extremely competitive were the people there. People were obsessed with status, if you recall from last week. The Corinthians, as I said, they were just what? They were just killing it, right? They were doing so great. The cross as a logo would have been laughable to the people of Corinth and even to the church in Corinth. You know, really, we're going to use that as our major? I don't think so. The cross, though, made Christianity quite unique. Not until Jesus burst onto the scene did we have a major religious figure be an executed man as the central focus of that faith. But Jesus, if you look at his ministry and how he spoke about the cross before he went to it, he used it to express deep loss, sacrifice, brokenness, the death of humanity in some ways, and God's suffering love. It offered a way of love, though, and of life, and of victory. Oh my gosh. An abundance that Amazon or Starbucks or FedEx couldn't even begin to offer. Paul was haunted. You have to understand this about Paul. He was haunted and captivated by the cross. For Paul, and this is one simple way of expressing some of his theology. For Paul did not view the cross as some ticket to heaven. All right, The cross revealed simply the depth of God's love for us. And Paul wanted to get that clear. Now let me get clear with you guys just for a moment. We Christians, many of us will say, well, Jesus bore the cross, so I don't have to. He never said that. Okay? Not true. Matthew 10, Matthew 16, Mark 8, Luke 9, Luke 14, Jesus in all these chapters says, pick up your cross and follow me. And he did not mean it metaphorically, pick up your burdens and follow me. No, literally, the disciples would have heard, be willing to lay down your life for me. Be willing to be nailed to a cross. Be willing to have your corpse rot on that cross if Rome wants to leave you up there. Some of us will say, I hear it. I guess it's just my cross to bear, right? This job or this strange relationship or this illness. That is making light of what Jesus is calling us to do. He is calling us to be willing to lay down our life. And that we better hope we look good on wood. He's being serious about that, okay? For Paul, on the cross, Jesus embraced all human sin, evil, guilt, death, with goodness, with love, and with life. Great paradox going on here. Jesus turns a form of capital punishment into a form of new life, where God defeats sin and death. Now, in the physics world, scientists have this term called singularity, where some have this theory out there that the entire universe at one point was this infinitesimal little dot. And then at one point there was this huge explosion, this big bang, and the whole universe came from this tiny little singularity. And the universe is still expanding. Well, for Paul, that tiny little singularity was that tiny little cross there in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. And from that cross to that resurrection, God's kingdom, our Lord's kingdom, has just been exploding ever since from that singularity. In 1 Corinthians, it's crucial to understand Paul's view of the cross this way. He called the Corinthians, those Corinthians, those wonderfully wild and weird, diverse, wealthy, divided, innovative, spiritually impoverished people, to be a people of the cross. And Paul understands what he's up against. He says this: for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, those who are not receiving this good news I'm sharing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. This cross is the power of God. The message of the cross is God's loving power. And the Greek word for message, love it, logos. The cross is our logos, if you will. It is our message. It is our symbol, okay? And the logo of the cross, the logos of the cross, is the power and love of God. This would have been totally bizarre and foreign to the Corinthians. The Corinthians who prided themselves on their intellect, on their culture. A Roman colony greater than Athens in the first century. A colony, that city that Caesar found favor in. Filled with Greek wisdom and culture, Roman power and wealth. It had sexual freedom and financial opportunities. Corinth is where you went to go to get ahead. There was no power seen in a crucifixion among the Corinthians. It wasn't exactly, let's face it, a career booster to get nailed to a 2x4, okay? The ancient world was very familiar with execution. Rome undertook various forms of execution, from drawing and quartering people to burning them at the stake, to beheading them, to poisoning them, okay? The crucifix, the cross, was a hassle. It required 4 soldiers to oversee, plus a centurion. It was costly. time-consuming to construct that cross and go through the whole process. And the government wanted to keep expenses down. Every government wants to keep expenses down. I get it, right? So why would they do it? 2 reasons they did the cross. Maximize the pain inflicted and maximize public humiliation. I mean, the person, depending on how they were crucified, whether they were nailed or tied to that cross, they could be on that cross for hours or for days, dying because of the elements and dying just from suffocating from the collapse of their lungs. And maximize public humiliation. Often the person would be, they would be stripped totally naked. Public spectacle. This happened to Jesus. They would be exposed. They would be shamed. They would be mocked. Often there was a procession, a parade to where they would be crucified to emphasize to as many people as possible, this is what can happen to you if you rebel against Rome. A person would be crying out during that parade of what this crime this person has committed. On a piece of wood would also be written down their crime. Okay. Maximizing the attention. Roman philosopher Seneca, back in the 1st century, said this: any self-respecting man would commit suicide before allowing himself to be crucified. Rome only used crucifixion for slaves or rebels who conspired against the government. It was one way Rome controlled the foreign nations around it, saying, if you rise up against us, this is what's going to happen to you. Okay. Now, as I've shared with you before, in the 1st century, many people proclaimed themselves as the Messiah. And basically that was received as, I'm the one who's going to save you from Rome and its oppression. So the last thing you want to have happen to you if you're a Messiah is being crucified, because that just blows out of the water that you're anything but a Messiah. There's wisdom, a prevailing wisdom in Corinth in the 1st century that said this: a good rule for leaders is to not disappoint people more than they can handle. Well, a Messiah getting crucified, okay, is more than his or her followers could absorb. Paul did not minimize Jesus' death on the cross. In fact, Paul, he highlighted it. And that would have been so bizarre to the Corinthian ears. So Paul says, you guys, the Jews here in Corinth, you demand signs, and Greeks, you search for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. Okay, Paul is saying, you guys, the Jews among you, here within the church and in Corinth, you are demanding signs. And Jesus even experienced this from the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. They would often say to Jesus, "Teacher, we want a sign from you. Are you really the Messiah? Give us a sign, will you?" Okay? We want to see signs of power. We want to see miracles that indicate you are the Messiah. Prove it to us, that you are able to overthrow Rome, that you are of God. They wanted a Messiah with a power logo, right? They wanted a Messiah who would exude this in the logo, right? They wanted the Rock, the worldly Rock, right? Dwayne Johnson, former professional wrestler, football player, now multi-million-dollar movie star. You want a Messiah? The Corinthians, the Jews among them, they want the Rock. Yeah. Yes, Jesus is the one true Rock. We know that. But physically, very likely, he was a typical Jewish man of the 1st century, which that is not typical, okay? Just saying. Certainly, Jesus didn't stand out like that physically. And here's Paul proclaiming Christ crucified. And Paul, described in the Acts of Paul, a letter written in the 2nd century, describes Paul. It's the only physical description we have of Paul, being bald-headed, large nose, but at least it was hooked, and bow-legged and unibrowed. Yes, unibrowed. Okay? There was nothing on fleek about Paul or Jesus. And if you weren't here last week, I'm sorry if you don't know what on fleek is. Get with the times, okay? And there's nothing on fleek about your pastor, okay? Believe it or not, no one has mistaken me for the Rock, okay? Yeah, no, they just, I don't know, I don't know why. The Jews in Corinth would have loved the logo of a Messiah that depicted a person with great physical attributes. But Paul is saying, sorry, that's not Jesus' brand. Mm-mm. And while the Jews in Corinth were looking for that kind of Messiah, the Greeks in Corinth were looking for one who was wise, filled with wisdom, maybe someone who was quite brilliant like Albert Einstein, right? Now, you have a pastor like Einstein. You do. I mean, not in the mind, but in the body. You know, yeah. Body-wise, I'm probably similar to Einstein. But the wisdom that the Corinthians sought was the kind of wisdom that would, have you stand over others and have you obtain wealth and honor and status. And Paul is saying to the Corinthians concerning all this, I know what you're looking for. I know what you guys are looking for. Christ did not send me to baptize. Now, I'll stop there just for a moment. The Corinthians at this point saw baptism as also a ticket to heaven. They saw baptism as a way to get ahead. They saw baptism as a way to look down upon others who weren't baptized. They saw baptism as a way to separate themselves and somehow be more holy than others. And Paul's like, ain't going there. And we'll talk more about Paul's concept of baptism later, but he's saying to them right now, I haven't come to baptize you because right now you totally misunderstand what baptism is all about. But I've come to preach the gospel. But, I'm not going to preach it with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. I'm not going to preach with the wisdom and eloquence you guys want, that you desire, okay? The kind of wisdom and eloquence that, can build the speaker up. I'm not here to build myself up, Paul is saying. It's not about me, okay? I'm here to preach Christ and Christ crucified. So when Paul says, you know what? I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. That is my focus. It's not about me. It's not about me wowing you with my oratorical skills. No. I'm to kind of decrease while Christ increases, is Paul's attitude here. Paul defied Corinthian conventional wisdom that the good life is about power and influence and control and strength. The Corinthians get that brand, power and strength. And Paul's saying, not here for that. I'm not here to be the smartest guy in the room, to look down upon others, but I know you understand that too, you Corinthians. Nope. Paul says, my brand is simply Christ crucified. Sorry. Now that's an oxymoron to the Corinthians. Those are two words that don't go together. They contradict each other. Sort of like jumbo shrimp, right? Hell's angels, small crowd, virtual reality, civil war. Don't go together. Airline food. Doesn't go together, right? Country music. Doesn't go together, right? Don't walk out. Just hang in there. I humor myself, even if I don't humor you. Christ crucified. Now remember, Christ is not a name. It wasn't Jesus' last name, okay? The Christ family, No. Christ was a Greek title, meaning anointed one, chosen one. And the Hebrew equivalent would be Messiah, okay? To the Corinthians, crucifixion meant you were not the Messiah. Rome defeated you. You could have crucifixion, or you could have a Messiah, but you can't have them both together. And Paul, though, rubs the Corinthians' noses in it. He's bringing it together. Be one thing to preach Christ crucified, I guess, as wise teacher, noble character, and really just preach Christ and leave out the crucified. That would make sense. But Paul is saying, nope. I'm going to be preaching to you Christ crucified, failed, nailed, crushed, shamed, humiliated, and executed. So get over it. I'm going to be relentless about this. And this turns the Corinthian world upside down. Oh my gosh. It's completely disorienting. The cross meant Jesus was tried, found guilty. His oppressors defeated him. All right? So in Corinth, where honor was the proof of merit and shame and failure, the proof of worthlessness, Jesus experienced the deepest, most public, dehumanizing shame known to the ancient world, being nailed to a cross. So, here's what Paul had to deal with. Either Jesus was not as great as Paul said, or greatness was going to have to be redefined. That human life that flourished would have to be redefined. That the Corinthian culture and values would have to be redefined. That Treasure Valley would have to be redefined. The First Christian Church would have to be redefined. That we as individuals would have to redefine our lives if we truly embrace Christ crucified in our lives. Paul is relentless in redefining the Corinthian world. He is relentless. That a crucified carpenter makes Rome and Caesar look like bit players in comparison. That Rome, that empire, it came and it went. But thousands of years later, Jesus' kingdom, from that singularity of that cross in Jerusalem, continues to expand. Oh my gosh. The power of the cross turns out to be the power of God fully expressed in Christ crucified. Now this whole letter by Paul, I'm beginning to wind it up here. This whole letter by Paul, it's like Paul is Sam I am. Okay, Dave? I do not like that. He's trying to get the people of Corinth to try green eggs and ham. Right? He is. The people in Corinth are so influenced, the church in Corinth is so influenced by their culture, they're having a hard time trying the green eggs and ham that Paul's serving up. That Christ crucified is the way of power and of love. It's like the Corinthians were saying to Paul, Paul, let us be. We will not try Christ crucified. Okay? We would not, could not on a boat. We will not with a goat. Okay? We will not meet him in the rain. We will not meet him in our brain. Okay? Not in the dark, not in a tree, not in Zanzibar. You let us be. We do not like your green eggs and ham. We do not like them, Paul, I am. If you look at this book, Green Eggs and Ham is so much about the loss of imagination. The Corinthians are lost in a world of wealth and greed and sexuality that they have forgotten how to imagine how else they could live life. Paul is just trying to get the Corinthians to not make up their mind before trying Jesus. And what is interesting in this book, hot water time. What is interesting in this book is that it's the older character who's having a hard time trying green eggs and ham. It's the fear of something new. I've never had my eggs and ham that way. I can't go there. No. I see that in our church. I see that with our new life ministry we're doing for the next 3 years. Oh my gosh. We've agreed to do this, and you all have agreed to do it. And I'm going to be relentless as Paul to see it through because you had every voice and opportunity, and your voice was, okay, we got to do something. So we're moving forward, folks. Okay? But change is coming down the road, and we don't like change. It turns our eggs green and our ham green, And change, the fear of it drives us to gossip. Oh my gosh, where's the money going? How's it being spent? Where's it? We can't trust anything. Oh my gosh, where's it going? It's not going to be like we used to. I get it. I'm not a huge fan of change. All right? We like to know what to expect. But folks, green eggs and ham is getting served up here in the near future. And you might as well try it, or you're going to miss out on new life. That's all I can say. That's Paul's attitude with the Corinthians. That's why I'm going there this way. That's Paul. He is relentless. Christ crucified. I know it doesn't make sense to you. I know it sounds fearful. It sounds like a completely different way of life than the way you've been living. But you got to try it. Don't give up on it. Don't turn your nose to it. Okay? Christ crucified is the way of love. And it is the way of new life. Amen? Now, I just happen to have something cooking over here. Yeah. And I actually have, oh my gosh, I have green eggs and ham up here. Literally. And now how many are real excited about green eggs and ham? A few, yeah. Okay, now see here, I'm gonna show you. It is green. It is green, right? See, I'll hold it here. It's definitely green. Oh, does that look good or what? Huh? Who wants to eat that? Definitely. Now that's your green eggs. And of course, we need ham, right? Okay, here is. Let me see if I can find some ham. Oh my gosh. Oh, does that look good or what? And yes, according to Dr. Seuss, the ham is also supposed to be green. Okay, it's just not the eggs. So I have green eggs and ham up here. It smells good. It looks delicious. And I'll tell you what, now I'm sensing a little fear here about trying this out, right? I fixed it, I honestly, so I wouldn't be rushed around this morning. I fixed the eggs last night and I put them in the refrigerator, covered them up. Then I heated them up again. And Disciples Women, I didn't ask permission to use that, but I'm using that broiler there, that whatever it is, to keep things warm. So it's my fault if something happens to it. And I guess I asked for forgiveness. But I'm sensing a little fear. And this is real important because there is a lot of fear with regard to new life because it sounds like green eggs and ham to a lot of people. It just isn't right, where it could be going. So would you be willing to give me like 5 more minutes to talk about fear in a Dr. Seuss way? You okay with that? I'm okay. It wasn't collective, but yeah, 5 minutes. Okay, so bear with me. I'll sit here. I have the stool here. Okay. This isn't a Dr. Seuss book, but these are words that are actually not in this particular book, but I've put them in here so I can read them to you because we're going to have reading time. We're going to have story time. You ready? Okay. Get your little, get the little quilt or get something, wrap up with each other maybe. Yeah, here's an opportunity to cuddle with each other. If Dr. Seuss, be careful with who you cuddle with. If Dr. Seuss got loose in our church, I think he'd address your fear in a lurch. Gather, my friends, because the end times are here, not the end of the world, but the end of your fear. So turn off the lights and make it dark now, I dare you. Stick around for a while, and I'm gonna unscare you. Now, when you were young and most things were quite swell, fear knocked on your door with a product to sell. And like most good salesmen, he cast quite a spell while selling insurance called All Is Not Well. Now, All Is Not Well came in its own case, the case that there's danger all over the place. And after you bought it, you thought all is not well and felt it was your duty to share and to tell. And so your mouth-to-mouth was how fear procreated, with no YouTube or Facebook to disseminate it. Fear soon went viral all over the globe until old-time religion to dispense and promote. Because fear knew the way to get globally big was to drive a false wedge between God and his gig. And that's how he came to be so domineering, by replacing God-loving with, you must be God-fearing. Then fear and religion began co-creating and gave images to a logo of fear they called Satan. As if infinite love had a worthy opponent with pitchfork in hand who could strike any moment. The concept was great for maintaining control, making people behave as if they're on parole. Because when God-fearing people are scared for their souls, they put much more silver and gold in the bowls. So business was booming, and fear kept on spreading, and fear loved the credit the devil was getting, for fear itself likes to stay hidden from view and play hide and seek in its house, which is you. I'm not afraid, I'm just angry. It shouts, I've been mistreated and need to speak out. I'm not afraid, I'm upset, and I'm caring. There's so many disguises that fear enjoys wearing. He's proud of his wardrobe because he's designed it. Though he wouldn't admit it, fear's quite closed-minded. So he doesn't realize that he's often dressed funny, wears layers of worry looking like a stressed bunny. And when you're not looking, he dresses you too in stress bunny outfits that don't become you, because when you wear worry, it wears tight and stiff from statically clinging to imagined what-ifs. Worst case scenarios fill your projector. Then fear says, don't worry, I'll be your protector. He shows you his life insurance policy and says, here's what you get when you sign up with me. You get top-notch around-the-clock security, an arm and alarm system on your body, and if you're harassed, I'm your personal bouncer. And for making decisions, I'll be your guidance counselor. No more will I let you take risks that could hurt you. Just stick with me, kid. I will never desert you. Now all of your loved ones have already signed. But be a black sheep. Join the flock. You'll be fine. So you signed up and breathed a big sigh of relief because you thought you'd feel safer with fear as your chief. But the contract had fine print too fine to be seen. You didn't read the clause that denied you your dreams. From then on, heart's desire that came to be birth were blocked by your fears before they could reach earth. It seems your new policy's whole life protection was more birth controlling than most contraception. How could you conceive of a life more abundant? With fear in your ear like a cable news pundit who's yelling, I'm telling the truth, fair and balanced, while drowning out most of your love, gifts, and talents. Now fear says, get real. That's his bottom line thing. And fear learned what's real from his friend Stephen King, whose collection of books make outstanding additions as long as you realize you are reading fiction, which is what you can do with your own fear collection. Just transfer them to your mind's fiction section. Because no matter how gripping a fear can tell, its original premise that all is not well is a bit topsy-turvy in the universe and deserves to be laughed off the face of the earth. And while you're laughing, you let in the light, which makes fear pack his bags and get on the next flight. Because he needs to feel needed when you choose joy. And when you choose joy, well, then fear has no place but to be unemployed. I'm bringing it home now. Fear used to feel needed when lions were chasing you, gathering speed with intentions of tasting you. But nowadays, all the lions will find are fictional cats roaming around in our minds. And when you stop feeding the cats in your head, they just go away because they're not getting fed. And with a clear head, you are free now to choose a channel that's broadcasting much better news. So get off the couch and turn off the TV and tune in to WLOVE. It's got no commercials and nothing to sell. Just a steady reminder that all is quite well. You're already covered by a plan you can trust. You've got Universal, the original plan. And there's never a moment when you're not in good hands. You're no longer buying fear's insurance scam because you know every moment you are safe in God's hands. I get it. We tend not to eat green eggs and ham. I understand the fear. Paul understood the fear of the Corinthians. This is another way of life. We're not familiar with Paul. We do not know if we can combine this Messiah being nailed to a cross. And I understand the fear here. I do. I just don't want you to miss out on the possibility of new life all around us. And for that to take hold, change does come. And we just need to hold on to each other. Green eggs and ham, we'll try it. We'll try it. Paul wanted the Corinthians to. We need to trust God in this. He's bigger than our fears. You can either have your decisions in your heart filled with that fear or filled with that amazing love of God that always wants us to grow. And with growth, inevitable change. God help us to partake of the green eggs and ham that we are served. Amen. Yeah, it's up here. I'm going to keep it warm. Right after service, you can come up. I'm sure you all will just make a beeline up here to try it out. You're more than welcome to get a plate, and there are utensils up here. But let's have a word of prayer. Almighty God, fill us with your peace. Help us to gather together as your children to partake of what you offer us. We may not understand. The change may be daunting. We may be fear-filled. So reach out to us where we are. We know you do. Help us to take the risks necessary to serve you in this world. It's not the world we all grew up in, many of us who are older, but it is the world those who are young among us are growing up in. And we need to honor that. We need to embrace it. We need to find ways to share your good news so that all can be served, so that all can partake of your merciful, abounding love. Amen.